With no reinforcements coming and nowhere to fall back, Sergeant Austin Baker slammed a fresh magazine into his pulse rifle, sweat and alien blood dripping down his face as he crouched behind the makeshift barricade on the remote planet Zolon 5. The human soldier took a quick count of his battered platoon, just 23 grunts left, running low on ammo and willpower as wave after wave of Breen shock troops crashed against their dwindling perimeter. Austin knew they were just a speed bump between Commander Merrick's massive army and the soft, juicy underbelly of Earth's frontier colonies beyond. Fall here, and a dozen human worlds would burn under Breen plasma bombardment by week's end. The grizzled veteran had watched humanity's 8th Expeditionary Force get chewed to pieces over the last 3 blood-soaked months, the Breen war machine devouring their once mighty battle fleets ship by ship, planet by planet. Every able body from 18 to 40 was getting scooped up by the draft back home. The shattered remnants of the 8th, Austin's guys, were the only thing holding the line now. They had strict orders to hold at all costs until relief forces arrived. Austin checked his rifle's charge again, enough juice for maybe 2 or 3 more firefights if he was careful with his shots. The rest of the platoon was even worse off, reduced to looting Breen corpses and scavenging power cells from wrecked vehicles. A few had lost limbs to plasma blasts and shrapnel, fighting on with prosthetics and stim injectors welded into place by desperate medics. They were ragged, worn down to the bone and fraying at the edges, but still they held. They had no other choice. "No retreat," Austin growled into the platoon battlenet, his voice raspy from the poisonous fumes wafting off the churned battlefield around their hillside fort. "No surrender. Make these alien bastards pay in blood for every inch of dirt." Determined clicks answered back from his soldiers, shouts of "Oorah" and "Humanity first" echoing across the line. They would make their stand here, no matter the cost. The entire human race was depending on them. But as the smoke and haze cleared, Austin could just make out fresh glints of metal on the horizon, the first glimmer of another Breen horde rising over the ridge to trample his exhausted defenders into the mud. Rumor had it that their leader Merrick took special pleasure in obliterating human resistance, making a twisted sport of hunting down pockets of Terran troops and massacring them one by one. They said he collected the skulls of human officers and wore their dog tags like trophies around his scaly neck. Some claimed he ate his captives alive, that he had sworn a blood oath to drown the human colonies in their own viscera. Austin didn't know if the stories were true. Didn't matter. What mattered was that Merrick was here, leading this next assault personally, and the Breen were about to throw everything they had left at the thin khaki line of Terran infantry, standing between them and total victory. The smart play would be to retreat, tactical withdrawal in the face of insurmountable numbers, live to fight another day. Reinforcements be damned. Leave this ball of rock to the crocs and save your hides. But looking around at the hard, sharp faces of his veteran squad leaders, their jaws set firm and rifles held tight in their hands, Austin knew there would be no retreat today. They were humans, god damn it, and they weren't about to let some stinking alien lizards just walk in and put their slimy boots on humanity's neck. Not now. Not ever. They would hold the line. They would make the crocs pay, even if it cost them their lives. Austin took a deep breath to settle his nerves, the acid stench of burning vehicles and roasted Breen flesh stinging his sinuses. In his mind, he whispered a quiet prayer for his husband and daughter back on Harvest's bounty colony, knowing he'd likely never see them again. The human soldier rose, leveled his rifle at the Breen horde surging over the horizon, and squeezed off the first defiant shot. Then all hell broke loose. The Breen war machine rumbled forward like a tsunami of metal and scales, an unstoppable force of nature bent on crushing the defiant humans underfoot. But Austin and his battle-hardened platoon had no intention of making it easy for them. As the enemy horde massed for the attack, the Terran defenders sprang into action with a speed and precision honed by months of desperate fighting. Austin barked orders, his voice cutting through the din of artillery fire and pulse rifle shots. His men scrambled to fortify their positions, setting up a lethal maze of booby traps, kill zones, and interlocking fields of fire designed to funnel the Breen into a meat grinder. "Finn, I need those heavy guns rigged to fire on their own yesterday," Austin shouted to his tech specialist, Corporal Finn Mackay. The wiry engineer nodded, his hands already flying over the control panels of their few remaining autocannons and missile launchers. "You got it, Sarge," Finn yelled back, sweat pouring down his face as he worked feverishly to jury-rig the temperamental weapons. "Just buy me a few minutes." The ground shook as the Breen opened up with a massive artillery barrage, raining down plasma fire and sonic shells on the human positions. Austin's men hunkered down behind makeshift barricades of rubble and wrecked vehicles, gritting their teeth as the bombardment pounded them relentlessly. Private Jensen took a direct hit, his body vaporized in a blinding flash of superheated plasma. Sergeant Nguyen lost an arm to a sonic shell, the shockwave pulping flesh and shattering bone. But the survivors held firm, their faith in each other and their cause unshakable. Then the Breen infantry swarmed forward, a chittering tide of vicious reptilian shock troops hungry for human blood. They charged into the teeth of the humans' defenses, only to be scythed down in droves by a hail of pulse rifle fire and shredded by hidden mines and demo charges. Scores of Breen soldiers were cut down in the first few seconds, their broken bodies piling up in mounds of smoking meat. But more surged forward to take their place, heedless of the slaughter. They clambered over the corpses of their fallen comrades, slashing with plasma claws and firing disruptor rifles as they pressed the attack. From his command post, Commander Merrick watched the assault unfold with mounting rage. The humans were putting up far stiffer resistance than he had anticipated, and his troops were paying the price. In a fit of frustration, he turned to his second-in-command, the ruthless Krog. "Take your best warriors and crush those hairless apes," Merrick snarled, his eyes blazing with fury. "I want their leader's head on a pike." Krag saluted sharply, his fangs bared in a predatory grin. He barked orders to his elite shock troops, a hand-picked cadre of the meanest, toughest Breen in the army. They formed up and prepared to spearhead the next wave, ready to show the humans the true meaning of terror. Watching the enemy regroup through his rifle scope, Austin knew they were in trouble. The Breen elites were a cut above the cannon fodder they'd been facing so far, and his platoon was already badly battered. They needed to disrupt the Breen command and control, throw their assault into disarray. An idea started to form in his head, a desperate gamble, but the only real choice they had. He gathered his most reliable men, Sergeant Nguyen, Private Ramirez, and Corporal Vasquez. They were all wounded and exhausted, but still ready to fight to the last. Austin outlined his plan to infiltrate behind enemy lines and take out Merrick's command post in a surprise attack. It was a suicide mission, but it might just buy the rest of the platoon enough time to hold out until reinforcements arrived. "You sure about this, Sarge?" Ramirez asked, his young face lined with fatigue and grime. "It's going to be a one-way trip." Austin nodded grimly. "We don't have a choice. If we don't cut the head off the snake, they'll roll right over us. We have to give the others a chance." Nguyen and Vasquez exchanged a look, then nodded their assent. They were veterans, hard men who knew the score. They would follow Austin to hell and back if that's what it took. Moving like ghosts, the small squad slipped out of their lines and began the treacherous crawl through no man's land towards the Breen rear. They had to dodge patrols, skirt minefields, and booby traps, all while staying low to avoid being spotted. It took them the better part of an hour to breach the enemy perimeter, every moment stretching like an eternity. But finally they were through, infiltrating the crude fortifications the Breen had thrown up around their command post. Austin took a moment to steel himself, locking eyes with each of his men in turn. No words were necessary. They knew what had to be done. With a burst of speed, they stormed the command bunker, pulse rifles blazing. The Breen sentries were caught off guard, several cut down before they could even raise their weapons. Austin and his squad fought like demons, whittling down the defenders with every shot. They carved a path of destruction through the heart of the enemy position, coming at last to the inner sanctum where Merrick cowered behind his bodyguards. Austin didn't hesitate. He bulled forward, blasting the guards to pieces with his rifle and explosives. Then it was just him and Merrick, face to face at last. The Breen commander was a towering brute, corded with muscle and decked out in battle-scarred armor. He unsheathed a pair of viciously sharp plasma blades, his eyes glowing with malice. "I will flay the skin from your bones, ape," Merrick hissed, his forked tongue flickering between rows of needle-sharp teeth, "and make a trophy of your skull." Austin just smiled mirthlessly, the light of battle in his eyes. "Come and get me then, you scaly bastard." The two leaders collided in a whirlwind of savage violence, plasma blades clashing against Austin's combat knife in a shower of sparks. They traded blows back and forth across the ruined command center, smashing through consoles and scattering terrified technicians. Despite his wounds and weariness, Austin fought with the strength of a man possessed. He parried and slashed with his knife, his muscles burning with effort. Merrick was incredibly fast and strong, a saurian juggernaut overflowing with natural weapons. The Breen scored several hits, gashing Austin across the chest and arms, sizzling his flesh with the superheated plasma. But the human refused to fall, battling back with unrelenting ferocity. In a final, desperate lunge, Austin drove his knife up under Merrick's armored thorax and into the soft meat of his throat. The Breen warlord convulsed, black blood gushing from the mortal wound. He toppled back in a crash of metal, choking and twitching. Austin stood over his vanquished foe, chest heaving with exertion. He yanked his blade free, the steel dripping with gore. For a moment, it looked like they might just pull off their insane gambit. Then Crag burst into the room, the Breen champion howling in rage at the sight of his fallen commander. He was followed by dozens of massively armored shock troops, the most elite warriors in the army. Austin's squad was out of time. "Fall back!" Austin roared to his men, laying down a barrage of covering fire as they scrambled to disengage. The humans fought like lions, cutting down scores of the elite Breen even as they gave ground. But Crag and his warriors were relentless, surging forward with fanatical grit to avenge their master. Private Ramirez bought it first, impaled through the chest by a shock trooper's plasma claw. Sergeant Nguyen went down a moment later, his body riddled with disruptor bolts. Vasquez and Austin fell back step by blood-soaked step, struggling to disengage and withdraw back to their own lines. Vasquez took a hit, his leg sheared off at the knee by a particle beam. He crumpled, screaming in agony as he clutched the cauterized stump. Austin hauled him up, slinging the wounded man over his shoulders as he fired wildly behind them with his rifle. It was a running battle every step of the way, the elite Breen harrying them mercilessly. Austin took multiple hits, his armor shattering and flesh burning. But somehow, through a combination of luck, skill, and sheer bull-headed purpose, he managed to drag himself and Vasquez out of the kill zone and back to the dubious safety of the human perimeter. He collapsed behind the barricades, Vasquez rolling off him and crawling to cover. They were the only survivors of the commando raid, both terribly wounded and barely clinging to life. But Merrick had been grievously injured as well. With any luck, it would be enough to disrupt the Breen assault and give the platoon a fighting chance. That dim hope was shattered a moment later as the massed Breen forces smashed into the human defenses like a tidal wave. Driven by rage and battle lust, the reptilian horde swarmed forward heedless of losses. At their head was Crag, the hulking champion roaring with fury as he led the charge to avenge his master. The platoon's carefully constructed kill zones and interlocking fields of fire scythed down the first wave, the autocannons and missile launchers rigged by Corporal Finn blasting great bloody gaps in the Breen ranks. Traps and mines blew scores more to pieces, shattered bodies pinwheeling through the air. The human defenders poured on fire from their small arms, pulse rifles and plasma carbines flashing as they fought with desperate skill. But more and more of the aliens pushed forward, trampling the dead underfoot in their frenzy to get to grips with the humans. The Breen shock troops hit the line like a battering ram, smashing through the barricades by sheer weight of numbers and fury. In moments, the battle devolved into a brutal melee, a whirling dance of death fought hand to hand and blade to blade in the blood-churned mud. Austin, barely conscious and bleeding from a dozen wounds, staggered to his feet and rallied his men for the last stand. There could be no thought of retreat or surrender now. They had to buy time for the refugees fleeing the colonies, holding the line to the last man. "Hold fast!" he bellowed, lashing out with the butt of his rifle to crush the skull of a charging Breen. "We stop them here, not one step back." His men responded with ragged cheers, a very real pride and lust for battle rising to banish their fear and pain. They were soldiers of Earth, and they would die on their feet, weapons in hand. The devastated platoon fought with reckless abandon now, giving as good as they got and more. Austin raged like a man possessed in the thick of the chaos, his rifle flashing as he put down alien after alien. All around him, his men battled on with equal courage and skill, from grizzled veterans like Nguyen to new meat like Ramirez. They were a brotherhood forged in the white heat of war, and they would not break. Slowly, inevitably, the tide of Breen began to falter and recede. The aliens left mounds of their dead, and a fortune in wrecked equipment scattered across the killing ground, but the cost had been high. Austin's platoon was a ruin, more than half his men down, and the rest battered and bloodied to the edge of collapse. The Breen fell back, regrouping beyond weapons range as their casualties mounted. In his command tank, Merrick, swathed in bandages and amped up on combat drugs, raged at his subordinates. "Crush them!" he snarled at Cragg, flecks of bloody foam spraying from his lips. "Bring me that damned ape's head, and I'll decorate you in glory." The hulking second-in-command saluted, fire in his eyes. "It will be done, my lord," he growled. "This time we finish it." Rallying the remaining Breen forces, Cragg prepared to unleash one last overwhelming assault on the shattered humans. This would be the final strike to break the back of the Terran resistance, opening the road to the soft underbelly of the colonies beyond. No mercy, no quarter, not now. The apes would be crushed once and for all, ground to bloody paste under the Breen battle claws. Watching the aliens massing through the murky haze, Austin felt a chill run down his aching spine. His men were on their last legs, reduced to a shell of their former strength. Ammo was low, medical supplies exhausted, morale crumbling. They had fought to the bitter end and beyond, holding the line against impossible odds, but there was nothing left to give. The enemy would come on in one final tidal surge, crashing over the barricades like a wave of scales and steel. And this time, there would be no weather in the assault, no clever traps or kill boxes to even the odds. It would be tooth and nail at the end, a brutal, bloody slugging match that could only end one way. The humans were dead men walking. Austin gazed at the battered faces of his remaining troops and saw the same knowledge etched there, the grim acceptance of warriors who knew the score. They would die, and they would die hard, but by God and Sonny Jesus, they would make the Crocs choke on it. One last dance with the Reaper, a chance to spit in the face of inevitable defeat and claw some honor from the ashes of bitter loss. "Fix bayonets," he told his men, voice raspy as he slapped a fresh mag into his pulse rifle. "Looks like we're going to finish this the old-fashioned way." Austin's men scrambled to fortify their positions, piling sandbags and scrap metal to reinforce the barricades. Sweat poured down their faces as they worked, the acrid smell of smoke and blood thick in the air. "Concentrate fire on these choke points," Austin barked, gesturing to a holographic map. "We make every shot count." Finn hunched over a tangle of wires and circuitry, his fingers flying as he jury-rigged targeting systems. "Almost got it, boss. This'll give us some extra eyes." The ground trembled as the Breen assault began. A wall of alien warriors surged forward, plasma weapons blazing. Explosions ripped through their ranks as they hit the minefields, but they kept coming. "Open fire!" Austin roared. The human lines erupted, pulse rifles and autocannons unleashing a storm of death. Breen warriors fell by the dozens, but more poured in to take their place. They smashed into the barricades, claws ripping and tearing. Austin led a counterattack, pulse rifle thundering as he drove back a group of Breen who'd breached the line. All around him, humans and aliens clashed in brutal hand-to-hand combat. "Fire in the hole!" a soldier screamed, hurling an improvised bomb into a knot of Breen. The blast sent alien body parts flying. Austin found himself cut off with Finn, the two of them falling back to the command center. They manned the last functional heavy gun, mowing down wave after wave of Breen. "Ammo's out!" Finn shouted as the weapon fell silent. They switched to grenades and bayonets, fighting with desperate fury as the Breen swarmed in. Austin's blade flashed, opening alien throats and bellies. A massive form shouldered through the melee. Crag. The Breen champion's eyes locked on Austin, mandibles clicking in anticipation. They came together in a clash of steel and claw. Suddenly, gouts of liquid fire erupted around them. Austin felt searing heat as incendiary weapons ignited the command center. He grabbed the wounded Finn and dragged him behind a fallen console, shielding him from the inferno. As the flames raged, Austin knew it was over. He locked eyes with Finn. "The warheads. It's our only shot." Finn nodded grimly. "I'll do it. You buy me time." Austin watched him go, then turned to face the oncoming horde. His rifle was empty, but his knife was sharp. He'd make the bastards work for it. Across the compound, the handful of surviving humans regrouped. They stared in shock at the devastation, the command center a blazing pyre. A thunderous explosion shook the earth, Finn's last act. As silence fell, the battered soldiers took stock. Less than 24 remained, nursing wounds and checking weapons. They had no idea if Austin had survived, but they knew their stand was over. All that was left was to dig in and pray for a miracle. Miracle. The thunderous explosion faded, leaving an eerie silence punctuated only by the groans of the wounded. Sergeant Cal Rains pushed himself up from the rubble-strewn ground, ears ringing. He blinked blood and grit from his eyes, surveying the devastation around him. "Sound off!" he bellowed. "Who's still alive?" One by one, battered soldiers called out. Rains did a quick head count. Only 23 left, standing out of the entire platoon. Most sported injuries, from minor cuts to grievous wounds. "Where's the lieutenant?" Private Chen asked, clutching a makeshift bandage to his arm. Rains scanned the battlefield, seeing no sign of Austin. "MIA for now. I'm taking command." He wasted no time organizing the survivors. "Rodriguez, Patel, start scavenging anything useful. Weapons, ammo, medical supplies. Chen, Singh, help me set up a perimeter." They worked quickly, piling debris to form crude barricades. With their heavy weapons destroyed, Rains focused on concealment. "Use the wreckage for cover. We need to disappear." As the humans regrouped, the Breen lines were in chaos. The blast had shredded Crag's assault force, leaving hundreds dead or dying. In his command center, Merrick seethed with fury, fresh bandages wrapped around his throat. "Regroup and resupply," he snarled at his subordinates. "I want those human vermin crushed." Crag stepped forward, mandibles clicking. "My lord, we should press the attack now, while they're weak." "Silence," Merrick roared. "We'll do this properly. No more wasted lives. Bring up reinforcements, then we'll finish this." Back in the human position, Rains took stock of their grim situation. Food and water were almost gone. Medical supplies dwindled as they tended to the wounded. Corporal Mackay lay pale and still, his breaths shallow. The field medic shook her head. "He's fading fast, Sarge. Not much we can do." Rains gritted his teeth. Without resupply, they were dead. He gathered his healthiest troops. "We need supplies," he said bluntly. "I'm authorizing raids on isolated Breen units. High risk, but it's our only shot." The first raid was a brutal affair. Rains led a team of 5, creeping through the rubble to ambush a small Breen patrol. They struck hard and fast, pulse rifles chattering. 2 humans fell, but they secured precious rations and medical gear. More raids followed over the coming days. Each time they lost good soldiers, but the supplies trickled in, keeping them alive. As the stalemate dragged on, Rains's scouts brought troubling news. Massive Breen reinforcements were moving up, preparing for an overwhelming assault. Rains looked at his battered troops. Ammunition almost gone, supplies exhausted, half the survivors walking wounded. Without Austin's leadership, Their situation seemed hopeless. But as he opened his mouth to address them, a distant explosion rocked the night, then another, and another. The humans exchanged puzzled looks. Something was happening out there beyond their rubble fortress. But what? Rains squared his shoulders, gripping his rifle. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. To the last round, to the last breath. Breath. The distant explosions grew louder, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Sergeant Cal Rains surveyed his battered troops, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow from weeks of relentless combat. He counted their remaining ammunition, a pitiful handful of magazines and grenades. "Listen up," Rains growled, his voice hoarse. "We're low on everything, but we're still in this fight. Mackay, I need you for a special op." Corporal Finn Mackay, his left arm bound in a dirty sling, stepped forward. "What's the play, Sarge?" Rains outlined his desperate plan, detailing the location of a Breen staging area and the antimatter warhead they detected. As he spoke, Mackay's eyes hardened with grim understanding. "It's a one-way trip," Rains said quietly. Mackay nodded. "We knew the score when we signed up. I'll get it done." Under cover of darkness, Mackay led his small team through the rubble-strewn battlefield. They crawled past Breen patrols, using stealth tech to avoid detection. At the enemy supply depot, they struck swiftly, overwhelming the guards. Mackay's hands flew over the alien device, sweat beading on his brow as he worked to arm it. A Breen warrior lunged at him, mandibles clicking. Mackay ducked, driving his combat knife up under the alien's armor. As the creature fell, Mackay completed the sequence. "It's done," he radioed. "Tell my family I—" The transmission cut off as a blinding flash lit up the night sky. The shockwave rattled windows for miles. Back at the human position, Rains allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction before the Breen counterattack began. Marique, more machine now than alien, led the assault personally. His cybernetic eye glowed balefully as he directed a punishing barrage against the human defenses. "Stand fast!" Rains bellowed as chunks of concrete rained down. He fired his pulse rifle, the weapon's capacitors nearly drained. Around him, his soldiers fought with desperate courage, hurling improvised explosives and fighting hand-to-hand when ammunition ran out. A massive Breen warrior, Crag, charged their position, scattering humans with swipes of his battle claws. Rains faced him, emptying his sidearm into the alien's chest. Crag stumbled, giving Rains the opening to close in with his combat knife. They grappled brutally, Rains slashing and stabbing as Crag's claws raked his armor. With a final surge of strength, Rains drove his blade up under Crag's jaw. The alien collapsed, but Rains had no time to savor the victory. A plasma bolt caught him in the side, and he fell. The remaining humans fought on, their numbers dwindling by the minute. Private Chen, barely 18, stood over Rains' fallen form, firing until his rifle clicked empty. He hefted it like a club, facing the oncoming Breen with tears in his eyes. Suddenly, searing lances of light split the sky. Orbital strikes hammered the Breen positions, vaporizing entire squads. Drop pods slammed into the earth, disgorging fresh human troops who waded into the stunned alien forces. In the chaos, a battered figure stumbled through the smoke. Lieutenant Austin Baker. He found Rains, still clinging to life, and helped him to his feet. Together, they rallied the 8 surviving defenders. As medics rushed to treat the wounded, Austin surveyed the carnage. Bodies lay everywhere, human and alien alike. The regiment's standard, tattered and scorched, still flew defiantly. Austin clutched it, his hands shaking.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.